In the dimly lit interrogation room, the scent of nicotine filled the air, creating an oppressive atmosphere. Detective Williams sat across from John Smith, laying out the photos collected from the scene, each one representing a lost life.
Is your name John Smith?
Yes.
What is your relationship with the deceased?
The two elderly people who died were my foster parents. The rest were some distant relatives I didn't even know.
15 lives were lost, including 2 infants. Such a dreadful crime was almost unheard of. John's indifferent attitude only fueled Detective Williams' anger. If not restrained by his uniform, one might have thought he would lash out violently.
Explain your actions. How did you manage to take 15 lives by yourself?
Suppressing his fury, Detective Williams continued the questioning. Indeed, orchestrating the deaths of 15 people was no small feat, but for John, it seemed almost effortless.
I rented a church. It had only 2 doors, front and back. Before the event, I locked the back door and placed enough gasoline in the corners to ignite the entire place. When the music started, I walked down the aisle laid with white roses and set the heavily decorated church on fire. Ha ha ha.
Describing the act as if it were a masterpiece, John recounted the process, bursting into laughter like a madman.
You beast.
Detective Williams couldn't contain his rage at John's lack of remorse.
You became an orphan at 10. Your foster parents raised you, sent you abroad for education, and even married their beautiful daughter to you. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were nothing but kind to you. How could you be so heartless?
It seemed Detective Williams had done his homework. He tried to appeal to John's conscience, hoping to stir some guilt within this heartless murderer.
Do you know Robert Smith?
10 years ago, he was a famous furniture tycoon in West City. Who didn't know him? But he died long ago. What does he have to do with this case? He was my father.
13 years ago. I was only 7 years old, too young to understand the complexities of human nature, filled only with innocence and naivety. My father, though a businessman, was a devout Buddhist, always carrying a string of prayer beads in his hand. He had told me more than once that he would give me those beads one day. To accumulate good deeds, my father would take me to remote villages during holidays to help impoverished families. It was there that I first met Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, who would later become my adoptive parents.
I've told you many times, we are not beggars. We can't take things without earning them. You useless child, I'll hurt you.
Thomas was a cripple, yet even so, Emily didn't dare to resist at all. Seeing Emily covered in bruises, I tugged at my father's sleeve. Only then did my father notice Thomas and his family.
Sir, it's just a piece of candy. There's no need to hurt the child.
In my memory, my father was tall and imposing, standing in front of Emily like a wall, giving her a sense of security.
Even a piece of candy is too much. If she gets used to taking things without earning them, she'll never leave this mountain.
Thomas was very stubborn, as if leaving the mountain was his lifelong obsession. People in the mountains were mostly uneducated, especially those of Thomas's age. It was this remark that made my father decide to take their family out of the mountains. At that time, my father's business was booming, and with the rapid expansion of his factory, he needed a reliable assistant. Thomas naturally became his top choice. And as it turned out, Thomas was indeed a valuable asset. In his first year at the factory, Thomas became the workshop supervisor. In the following days, instead of becoming complacent, he started teaching himself programming. In just 3 months, the workshop he was in charge of became the first automated workshop in my father's company. From then on, Thomas became the second in command of the company. In just 3 years, with Thomas's help, my father's furniture brand became the largest in the country. However, the relationship between my father and Thomas seemed to be quietly changing. I had overheard my father and Thomas arguing in the office more than once. By now, Thomas had long shed his shabby clothes for expensive suits. Compared to my vegetarian and Buddhist father, he seemed more like the one in control of the company. This also set the stage for my father's nearly tragic end. I clearly remember it was a winter day. My father, who was tutoring me at home, received a call from the factory.
All right, I'll be right there.
After receiving the call, my father's face turned grim.
Dad, where are you going?
Dad needs to go to the factory. Be a good boy and wait for Mom and Dad at home.
My father gently patted my head.
Dad, your prayer beads.
I obediently handed him the prayer beads from the table.
Good boy.
That night, I waited until 3 in the morning. I didn't see my parents, but I saw Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. Thomas told me that my parents had passed away in a fire at the factory the previous night. The police concluded that the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit due to aging wiring, and my parents' passing was a tragic coincidence. After my parents passed away, Thomas Thompson naturally became the largest shareholder of the company. At my parents' funeral, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson announced in front of everyone that they would adopt me as their son. Their passionate speech moved everyone present.
We will take care of John as our own. We owe it to Robert.
The media even wrote a report about it, with the headline, "Billionaire Remembers Kindness, We Are Brothers in the Next Life Too." Because of this report, the company's stock price not only didn't drop due to the fire but actually rose significantly. Thomas Thompson became a model of gratitude, appearing in the news multiple times. If the story ended here, it would be a beautiful tale. But things never go as people wish. It seemed like events would never unfold as expected.
I was 17 that year, and the pain of losing my parents had gradually faded. Living with Thomas Thompson for so many years had made me exceptionally sensible. I thought I would live a peaceful life until a month before I turned 18.
John, I want you to study abroad. What do you think?
Over the years, Thomas had completely transformed. There was no trace of his former poverty. He now had a son of his own, who, though only 10, was exceptionally smart. As for Emily Thompson, despite Thomas's improved circumstances, he never seemed to like his daughter much, especially after having his son, Michael Thompson.
The annoying brother is finally leaving. Ha!
Shut up.
Thomas rarely scolded Michael. I understood. Though my father had been gone for many years, legally, the shares were still mine. Thomas wanted me to leave because he feared I would compete with his biological son for the company once I came of age. So, I readily agreed to Thomas's request.
I understand. After all, Thomas had been running the company for so many years. Even though I was his adopted son, how could he bear to give me such a vast fortune?
Thomas was very pleased and even invited the company's senior members to see me off before I left.
Old Lee, Robert has been gone for so many years, and you still tirelessly raised his son. People like you are rare.
Indeed, Mr. Thompson is kind-hearted. The business will only get better.
At the banquet, a group of sycophants surrounded Thomas, flattering him.
Even after all these years, I can't forget Robert's kindness. To remember him, I even bought a set of prayer beads just like his.
As Thomas spoke, he took out the prayer beads hidden in his sleeve. Hearing Thomas's words, I couldn't help but feel moved and glanced at the beads. But when I saw them, I was stunned. Those beads were clearly my father's. Even after all these years, I knew that the pattern on the second bead was different from the others. This was because I had broken the beads once when I was a mischievous child, and my mother had rest-wrung them without noticing, causing the pattern on the second bead to be reversed.
How could it be? How did my father's beads be in Thomas's hands?
A suffocating feeling surged in my heart. I stared at the beads in disbelief, not even hearing Emily's call.
What's wrong?
Nothing.
My mind was in turmoil, but I didn't say anything.
Take care of yourself abroad.
Emily said as she handed me a scarf. I had some impression of the scarf. She had been working on it for the past month.
You take care too. Michael.
I was leaving, and Michael would probably become even more unruly. Emily's days would likely be tough. So, amidst the insincere blessings of everyone, I boarded the plane to a foreign land. In the dimly lit interrogation room, Detective Williams leaned in, trying to break John Smith's silence.
You became an orphan at 10. Your foster parents raised you and even sent you abroad for education. They even married their beautiful daughter to you. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were nothing but good to you. How could you be so heartless?
Do you know Robert Smith?
10 years ago, he was a famous furniture tycoon in West City. Who didn't know him? But he died long ago. What does he have to do with this case?
He was my father.
The detective's aggressive questioning made me increasingly uneasy, but I didn't show it.
Burned to death. But before being burned?
I told you, I hid the gasoline in advance.
You're lying. The latest autopsy results are out. All these victims took sleeping pills before they died.
I forgot.
Do you think I believe you? Tell me, what really happened? Who killed the 15 members of the Thompson family?
Detective Williams was furious. They couldn't accept being toyed with and were desperate to know the truth.
Can I have a cigarette?
The detective didn't refuse my request and even lit one for me. Taking a deep drag, a searing pain surged through my throat, followed by a wave of dizziness.
It was Emily Thompson.
What?
When I said that name, everyone was stunned.
I didn't want to say it, but I didn't expect you to find out.
In fact, after I went abroad, I didn't lose contact with Emily. Our written exchanges only brought us closer. Thomas Thompson didn't treat me as well as he claimed to others. After I arrived in a foreign country, Thomas never sent me a penny. Even my tuition fees were earned through my own hard work. Perhaps due to the talent my father gave me, I gradually started doing business abroad. Thanks to Thomas's neglect, I learned to grow in adversity. But I never forgot about that string of prayer beads. And I had a hunch that Emily, being Thomas's first daughter and the first to join our company, knew something. I began to actively contact Emily. I knew very well that although she was Thomas's biological daughter, Emily's life wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. Thomas didn't like girls, he even had a certain disdain for them. When he beat Emily in front of my father, it wasn't because he wanted her to succeed, but simply because he wanted to exert violence. To uncover the truth, even though my work and studies were extremely busy, I made time every day to chat with Emily. Gradually, Emily began to accept my greetings as her older brother. She started to confide in me. Until that summer, when David Thompson was 16, Emily disappeared. And I, without informing Thomas and his people, returned to the country. When I saw Emily Thompson again, I found her covered in bruises, just like when she was a child.
John, can you take me away?
Emily, covered in wounds, curled up on the bed, looking at me helplessly.
What happened? Emily, tell me, I'll protect you.
I was furious. Even though I had a certain purpose in approaching Emily, I always felt some guilt towards her.
Emily, do you think your father loves you?
I don't know.
No, he never loved you, did he? All he cares about is your brother Michael. And you hate him. You even want to end him. End that beast Michael.
I repeated these words over and over, trying to stir up Emily's inner hatred.
I hate him.
Finally, Emily said the words I most wanted to hear. In the interrogation room, the detectives were captivated by my story. Even the officer responsible for taking notes was stunned.
Psychological manipulation?
Yes.
At that time, Emily Thompson had just been violated by David Thompson and was in a vulnerable state. I took advantage of her weakness. Emily had already regarded me as her closest person, so how could she doubt my words? To make Emily truly listen to me, I had to put in a lot of effort. For 2 years, I spent my savings to buy Emily anything she liked. I even funded her piano lessons, which she loved.
Emily, you're not worthless as Thomas claims. You have so much potential.
Under my relentless brainwashing, Emily finally awakened. She started to resist Thomas and even began to speak ill of Thomas and David with me.
But when it came to my father's death, she remained silent. So, I began to suppress her, deny her, and even threaten to leave her, causing her newly built confidence to crumble instantly.
By then, Emily couldn't bear to be without me. To keep me, she tried every means to please me, even secretly flying to my country just to spend a night with me. Despite all this, I never heard what I wanted from Emily.
Finally, I played my last card, which was to have Emily carry my child. When Emily realized she was pregnant, she panicked. Even though she thought she had awakened, she was still terrified of Thomas. My betrayal became the final straw that broke her.
Using an anonymous phone card bought online, I informed Thomas that his daughter was pregnant. As expected, Thomas was furious. He not only beat Emily severely but also took her to terminate the pregnancy. Throughout it all, Emily never betrayed me. From that moment on, Emily truly regarded Thomas as her enemy. It was on that day that Emily told me the truth. She had personally witnessed the fire that claimed my parents' lives.
I admit she was very young then, but at the very least, she should have told me the truth instead of hiding it for 20 years. She remembered clearly that it was her father who had attacked my father in the factory. So, she was guilty too.
I began to torment her, humiliate her. I even sent her photos of me with other women.
When she was on the verge of breaking down, I transformed into an angel, comforting her while subtly reminding her of her past wrongdoings.
Eventually, Emily Thompson's psychological defenses crumbled. She began to follow my instructions, losing any sense of her own independent will.
She became like a lifeless puppet, a dog at my command. So, on the eve of my return to the country, I told her my plan.
As I expected, she was numb to my decision, even thinking it was justified.
On the eve of the wedding, I instructed her to put sleeping pills into all the drinks and beverages prepared for the wedding. So, when the fire broke out, it was too late for anyone present to realize something was wrong.
A great fire burned away all their sins, leaving nothing behind.
For this revenge, you spent nearly 3 years. You are indeed a devil. But I can't understand why you didn't expose Emily Thompson earlier, given how much you hated her.
At first, I did want to end her life, but until you caught me, I realized that sometimes, living is more painful than anything else. Think about it, the person she loved the most, the only one she trusted, was using her all along. And she even helped this person destroy all her relatives in this world. How is she supposed to live now?
My words received no response from the detective. I could finally rest. The days ahead would be spent waiting for the court sentencing notice, and then facing the end. On the 14th day in the detention center, Emily Thompson came.
Why?
After more than half a month, Emily Thompson seemed even more haggard, and even her voice was weak.
Why are there so many whys in this world? I'm just tired and don't want to go on living.
Seeing Emily again, I deliberately pretended to be relaxed.
John, did you ever love me?
No, never.
Look into my eyes. Why don't you dare to look at me?
Emily shouted, tears instantly streaming down her cheeks. The more she acted like this, the less I dared to look up at her. Emily left, and I thought I would never see her again. I had thought my case would proceed smoothly since I had confessed everything. Even if Emily was guilty, it wasn't to the extent of deserving such a fate. But I didn't expect things to take another unexpected turn. That day, I was taken out for another interrogation by Detective Williams. To my surprise, I wasn't taken to the interrogation room this time. Instead, I was brought to the monitoring room outside the interrogation room, where Emily was sitting.
We can begin.
What do you mean? Isn't the case already closed? Why are you interrogating Emily again? She was acting under my orders.
Seeing Emily, I admit I panicked.
John Smith, you're smart, but you underestimated human conscience. Listen carefully.
Detective Williams leaned forward, his eyes piercing through the dim light of the interrogation room.
You became an orphan at 10. Your foster parents raised you, sent you abroad for an education, and even married their beautiful daughter to you. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were nothing but good to you. How could you be so heartless?
It seemed that Detective Williams had done his homework on me. He was trying to awaken my conscience, hoping to evoke a shred of guilt.
Do you know Robert Smith?
He paused, gauging my reaction. 10 years ago, he was a famous furniture tycoon in West City. Who didn't know him? But he died long ago. What does he have to do with this case?
He was my father.
Outside the interrogation room.
She's lying! I did it! She's trying to deceive you!
I shouted at Officer Johnson, trying to take the blame upon myself. Inside the interrogation room, Emily Thompson seemed to hear my shouts. She looked at the camera and said,
I did it all. John Smith, you need to live well. I'm not worth such a sacrifice from you.
Emily was already in tears.
You're lying! I don't need you to take the blame for me. I did it, and I'll take responsibility. You need to shut up!
I roared into the microphone, not knowing if Emily could hear me. But even so, the police no longer believed my words. Because Emily not only clearly explained where she bought the sleeping pills but also provided records of her trip abroad for a procedure. In the end, the police concluded that Emily was the real culprit behind the demise of the 15 members of the Thompson family. No matter how much I argued, it was useless because, in my story, Emily had the procedure done domestically. A month later, the trial finally concluded. Emily Thompson was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to death. As for me, I was found guilty of intentional concealment and obstruction of justice and sentenced to 3 months in prison. 3 months later, I was released, and Emily was about to be executed. Before her execution, Emily had one last chance to see a family member. As her only relative, I naturally came.
John, forget about me. After I'm gone, you need to live well, okay?
Perhaps because she was about to leave, the prison guard had put light makeup on her, making her look less haggard.
Ever since my parents died, I haven't lived well.
I looked at Emily, tears streaming down her face, and said coldly.
What?
Emily didn't understand why I would say that.
Goodbye. In the next life, don't be human. You and your family don't deserve it.
My words pierced her heart like a sharp thorn.
John, what do you mean? Don't you love me?
Almost trembling, Emily questioned me. Love? Ha, never. How could I love someone who caused my parents' demise? Even if she was just a child then, I could never forgive her. Emily Thompson is dead. To be precise, everything about the Thompson family has vanished. And I, for a time, became the focus of the news media.
Can you tell us more about the Thompson family?
There's nothing more to say. What happened is in the past.
Some reports were good, some bad, but to me, it didn't matter anymore. Standing at my parents' graves, I shared one last drink with them.
I hope you can find peace now.
Then I boarded a flight to a foreign land, leaving this place of sorrow forever.